Have you ever heard the question, I'm just one person, what can I do? We're going to be talking about that today in lieu of our previous conversations here with Mark Renfroe at our World Challenge Gary Wilkerson podcast. Previous conversations about the need around the world. So many lost people, but not only so many lost people, lost nations, lost tribes, lost people groups, and some places that are so unreached that they don't have any real opportunity other than maybe a dream, supernatural dream to come to Jesus. But Jesus, I think he likes to use people, and we're people, and we want to talk today about what we can do, particularly those of us who are, some of the things we were talking about in the past were, the difficulty. We don't know the language. We don't have a similar culture. We have a different faith, particularly maybe some of the Islamic countries and cultures. Where the great dragon, or what do they call it? The America is the great demon.
Oh, the great Satan.
The great Satan. Yeah. So all of these negatives that are against us, and we feel so overwhelmed at the massive amount of need. 3+ billion people don't know Jesus. So many countries are hard to reach or persecuted to be able to reach them. So it's almost like you sort of like, well, maybe I'll say a prayer every once in a while. That might be the best I can do. So are there other ways for us that are listening to this to become, I would say the thing I'm looking for.
I was hoping you were going to say this.
You're hoping I was? Or
I was hoping you were. I was going to ask you to unpack this. Yeah.
I want to be interested in that because if my heart's not interested, I'm not going to do the next two.
Right.
I would like to be invested in some way, and I'd like to be involved some way. But I really don't know what all that means. If I'm not interested, how do I get interested? If I'm not involved, how do I get involved? Are there ways I can get involved? If I'm not investing, what are some good ways? And of course, we believe in what we're doing. We would love for people that would love to give to World Challenge, and I don't want to. I don't want to do anything unseemly here, but, we spend millions of dollars every year, millions and millions of dollars every year because we believe in this and want to do it, and we need help and support. I'm not ashamed to say that.
Well, I think the wonderful thing, it's a wonderful thing, and it's a problem, it's a challenge, is that our vision actually exceeds our resources.
That's right, yeah.
And when that, the only way you can grow and live into what God's called you to do is to increase our resources. And so we're thrilled when partners decide to come alongside us and help us in what we're doing.
And maybe if some people have been listening to the last 4 or 5 weeks of this particular area we've been touching on lately, they might be saying, I'm just one person, what can I do? And that's certainly one way. Our vision is exceeding our resources, and they may have resources that could match the vision.
Absolutely.
And help us engage in that. But yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. Where does your mind first go when you hear me say, I'm just one person, what can I do?
I think you nailed it. Those, I don't know that I've ever heard those three, I like alliteration. So because it's memorable.
And what can I do?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't even put that together, but yeah. So, the interest piece. So you said, what can I do if I'm not interested? The reality is not much. And I really do believe that that's where the Holy Spirit really plays a role. I never want to overemphasize a personal, anything that I do.
Okay.
But I don't either want to de-emphasize or lessen the significance of the last 4 weeks of podcast. Mm-hmm. That if someone's been listening to this podcast, they've been given information that if they are praying about that information, it will pique interest.
Yeah.
Now, some may hear, we're talking about other parts of the world and go click.
Yeah.
But to whom much is given, much is required. I do think that, once we know information, regardless of what it is, regardless of what domain it is, we have to do something with it.
Yeah.
We choose to ignore it, or we choose to, store it somewhere, or we choose to act on it. Right. And I certainly would hope that people would act on the information that they've received. And so
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. It would be interesting to me to see, so somebody has not listened to the last 4 times we were together, the last 4 podcasts, but they're picking up now. is there an interest to go, well, let me listen to the 4 other, or maybe the Holy Spirit is even saying, like, you're not interested,
And
you're ready to turn it off, but let's hang on a little bit. Let's see what happens here, and then if you'll go back, and I think if you go back and listen to the last 4, you'll be in a good way ruined. To be like, it'd be almost impossible not to be interested. You'd have to have a really cold heart and somebody that is more self-absorbed than, and I don't mean that critically to people who are listening. There might be other reasons. Just, you might be in a season of depression or discouragement, or you might need ministry so much yourself that you're not thinking. But that's not the norm for us, growing Christians. And so I think that we could help. There, you have, where I have lacked interest, you have helped me as just one-on-one. Statistics help me.
Sure.
And so, sometimes almost I try to put blinders on, I don't want to read about 3 billion people that have never heard of Jesus. I want to hear about, I could preach another sermon next week, and I'd say, well, a really good sermon, and I could read 5 books that are written in English about, but then that ruins me too, because then I go well, wait a minute, I have 5 books that can help me, understand what Luke 5 says, but most people in the world have never even heard of what the Gospel of Luke is, and so there has to be a better appropriation of these things. So that's, that, and I think another thing I think we could do is if we say, there's this honest thing, sometimes when I've been sharing Christ with people, they don't have any interest, and I'll just ask them, would you pray that if there really is a God, please help me to become interested in this, and if there really is a place for us in a faith that is more global, then we could actually ask our friends that are listening to us, ask God to stir your heart where it's not stirred.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you just said. And so, one of the things I think we do when we have interest, so you've listened to this, even starting today, the Lord piques your interest. What do you do with that?
Right.
So I think you grow in information. There are so many places, you and I have talked about, videos you can watch on YouTube, videos you can watch on radical.net, statistical information you can get from Joshua Project.
Excellent.
.net. These are places that you can go to discover more about what God is doing around the world, and places where there is need.
Right.
William Carey, missionary pioneer that went to India in the 1800s, used to say every Christian ought to pray with an open Bible and an open map.
Yeah.
Today, I say every Christian ought to pray with an open Bible and an open app.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There are apps that you can put on your phone. I have one on my phone. It's called the Daily Unreached. And every day, I get a different unreached people group that comes up, and I pray for that people group.
And some of them, I don't know if that's particular app has it, but some of them have a lot of content to it. It'll say, here's the nation, and here's its political, and here's its demographics, and here's its economics, and here's how many Christians, if there are any at all. A lot of them in that podcast, in that app, say no known Christians.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that and that really ought to to be interested in something is different than I'm interested in sports. This is a kingdom issue.
Kingdom interests should not be passive.
Right.
It should be active.
Yeah.
I can, here and going back to the sports, most of us are armchair quarterbacks. We watch a football game or whatever sport that we like, and we critique or maybe if we just enjoy, but it takes another level of engagement to start learning the statistics about the players, and then another financial investment to go to a game, and that sort of thing. So even, I know that's probably a poor illustration, but that idea of growing interest, so that interest would move us to engagement.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that this is going to sound like I'm being critical of people, and I'm going to use the word in probably the wrong way, but I think there's a lack of interest because there's an ignorance.
Sure.
Not like I'm calling you an ignorant person, but we're ignorant of the needs, where they are, and some of these other words we're about to talk about, we're ignorant of any way we could get involved. So maybe we almost want to shut the door to it, because I'm not going to have my heart move deeply in compassion and brokenness and then just feel the frustration of like, well, the more you know, the more you hurt, and but that hurt, I think, is alleviated if you know there's something you can do. So
yeah, and you last week you made reference to this sermon your dad preached, a call to anguish,
right?
And years ago I heard someone say, talking about America, they said they felt like the God of America was materialism, and I kind of pushed back and I said I don't think it's materialism, I think it's comfort.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Materialism is only a facilitator of comfort.
Right. Yeah, we need the materialism to make
be
us comfortable. Yeah.
But we don't want to be discomforted in any way. Yeah. And what is it that before the truth sets you free, it makes you mad. I mean, to the information that we've shared about the global church, where the church is, where it's not, how resources are used, places in the world where there is no gospel presence, no gospel penetration, as Christ followers, that ought to bother us. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't, you might, someone who spent 30 years as a missionary and then, in missionary leadership, sometimes people would think, well, then Mark thinks the natural fix for this is that all of us should be missionaries. Right. And I don't actually think that. Yeah. I do believe that if God calls you to be a missionary, you should be a missionary. And I will be the first to say that, as we talked about last week, with 7,000 plus people groups without gospel presence, and somewhere between 2.8 and 3.5 billion people being gospel ignorant, somebody's getting called and they're not responding. Because I know spiritually that God says He is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So it's hard for me to believe that there are so many people in the world who have yet to hear the gospel, and God isn't calling. Yeah. That I do think that there are people who are not responding. Yeah. But I think the majority. Let's kind of maybe we'll deal with that at the end. But the majority of people are not going to be in that category of being called. Yeah. But I do think we should all be burdened. We should all have a burden for the lost. Yeah. We should all have a burden for the unreached. And then the question is, what do we do with that? Yeah. So information, one of two things happens. Either, I don't want to know that because it's just that's going to cause discomfort. Or I think there's a possibility that I hear 3.5 billion people who've never heard the gospel. What in the world could I possibly do living in, wherever? Right. And that's a valid question. But I think we can go from being interested to the next level. Yeah. What was your next one? I know.
Well, you can go either way. I think they're equal, either involved or invested.
Okay.
Invested is giving to missions. Okay. Involvement is maybe a broader way of doing that. So you can go with either one, where would you start? Involved?
I think involved is good. Okay. Because it helps us to say, what am I going to do with the information? Yeah. So involvement, and there's an overlap because, we talk about prayer, and that's an involvement of my time, or it's an investment of my time. Right. But, so spending time getting to know more, that interest is peaked. Yeah. We read missionary biographies. Right. We watch a YouTube video. There's so much available out there today. Right. We recommended a book a couple of episodes ago, Let the Nations Be Glad. Yeah. By John Piper. Great book for an introductory interest in missions. Maybe asking, someone in your church, what does our church do for missions? Right. And finding out, I didn't know we did that, at my church. Of course, I have a background, but I serve on the church missions board. Right. Interestingly, I serve on the missions board with several people who've never had any kind of experience. Like they did this as an act of service because they wanted to be involved. Yeah. They realized, there is this need. What can I do? And this was one thing they could do. So they got involved there. I think there's value in, I talk to people when I travel around and I'll ask, do you have any Hindus in your community? And a lot of times I'll get, no, I don't think so.
Right.
I'm like, do you have any Indian restaurants? They're like, yeah. It's like, then you've got Hindus.
Yeah.
Do you have any Buddhist? I don't think so. I don't know of any. I said, do you have any Thai restaurants or Vietnamese restaurants or Chinese restaurants? Oh yeah, we got a bunch of those. Then you've got Buddhist.
Right.
We could keep going with
and
that.
If you're, pardon my interruption, but if you're thinking in terms of, okay, so like an unreached people group, a Hindu one in India, and there's an Indian person in your community, it's just to try to help clarify in my mind, because we've talked a little bit about, like America being so gospel saturated. They have so now this person from this unreached people group is in America. Not that you're using that person, but it's maybe a conduit in a sense. If you would have the joy and privilege of leading them to Christ, they might be more that near neighbor you're talking about.
Yeah, maybe. Certainly.
But that's not really what you're thinking.
No, well, it's a bit of both. But, so you might say, I can't go to India. Right. I can't solve the fact that, India is now the most populous country in the world. They say, up to 1.8 billion people in India. Yeah. It passed China.
Yeah.
And so, it'd be easy to say, I can't go to India. I can't so I can't do it. I can't have any impact amongst Indians.
Right.
But there are Indians living in your own community.
Yeah.
So that falls down, that excuse kind of disintegrates. But what it does require, Gary, is it requires higher intentionality.
Yeah.
And it takes a being willing to step out a little bit higher in not physical risk, but maybe emotional risk or relational risk or risk of embarrassment. But most people that I know love to talk about themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I would encourage people, don't feel like you need to show up in one of those relationships and from day one, just like, I'm going to be a missionary to the Hindu who lives in my neighborhood.
Right.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
And then that creates what I've discovered is when I show interest in somebody, they show interest in what's important to me. And that opens up a natural opportunity for me to be able to share Christ, but it also gives me insight into where they came from.
Yeah.
So this person maybe is an immigrant from India.
Yeah.
What was the immigration process like for you?
Yeah.
What was it like to move here? And, did you speak English? Was it hard? When you went to school, were you bullied because you were different? Just asking those questions lowers the resistance level at the same time as it raises your knowledge and empathy level. All of a sudden, these aren't enemies.
Right.
These become friends.
Yeah, I love that.
And through friendship, you all of a sudden have a greater interest in maybe where they come. I've met people who said, I never had an interest whatsoever in going to India. It was actually India that this was involved in. Had no interest, but I met an Indian on my university campus, became close friends with them. They invited me when they got married. They invited me to go to India to be in their wedding.
Oh, cool.
And all of a sudden they're like, I go to India every couple of years now. And I love going to India and I give to ministries in India and all that. And all of it started with starting with a relationship with someone unlike them.
That's cool. I like, there's a thing here in America now that a lot of people are practicing. It's lovely, called natural evangelism. It's not sort of like I'm going out witnessing and giving tracts or preaching on a street corner, which is a valid way to share the gospel as well. But it's just building relationships, or like my wife and I, Kelly, we always like to pray for her, ask them if there's a prayer request for our waiter or waitress, things like that. Just a natural way to do it. But I think in a sense there's something you're talking about that I'd never even thought about before. I'm sure maybe others. This sort of natural travel. Several people. Maybe they retire and they travel the world, or go to a wedding or take a vacation, and they go to Bali or whatever. And I don't know if Bali's an unreached people group or not.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So
it's the Buddhist part.
Okay.
Buddhist Hindu part of Indonesia, which is the world's largest Muslim country.
Oh, okay. Wow. So yeah, spot on. So I'm encouraging people to go to Bali. If my wife is listening, you can buy the tickets today. And,
very nice place.
Yeah, but. Like I know when Kelly and I ask waitresses or waiters, "Can we pray for you?" They're kind of expecting a tip, so they're probably a little nicer, and like they're not going to say "Shut up and leave me alone." So they almost always think of something. But in some, in the service industry and some of these nations, you might get a better response to somebody that might be hard on the gospel than if you're a tourist and you're curious about them, like you're saying, and they're curious about you. I hadn't thought about that. I think that's kind of a cool way to, because then it's natural. You're not going like, I'm going and I'm going to spend 2 weeks in India and I'm going to go try to tell everybody I can about Jesus. You're going part of your natural life. And some people even have said the translation of, go ye therefore into all the world. I don't know if you heard this before. Is you can translate in the Greek, as you go into the world, preach the gospel. And I think that's not quite as a valid translation either, but I think it's worth thinking about that. As you go about your life, whether it's at the restaurant, the Indian restaurant, or if you take a vacation, or if you want to go and volunteer somewhere, not like what you said in one of our previous episodes of, 30 kids going and we're going to paint a house that somebody else could paint there, and but maybe just go to help.
But that is, like I said, I'm not opposed to short-term missions, because I do think that's a next level maybe of involvement.
Okay, right.
So you show interest, you grow in interest. What can I do other than, okay, now I have this information,
right? But
what could I do?
Yeah.
You hear your church is doing a short-term missions trip to so-and-so, you decide, you sign up. Yeah. Most of these are most of the short-term missions trips are to relatively friendly locations. They're not taking you to Yemen or Libya, And one of that reasons is because they're also going to places that are close by because they're less expensive.
Yeah.
So they're going to Mexico or Costa Rica or El Salvador or whatever, Yeah. And so going to a place like that, it's good to be exposed to a different culture. Yeah. So that helps you grow.
Yeah.
While you're there, you discover what is God doing in these places, that sort of thing. It's a very much a discipleship moment for you, because all of a sudden, life's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about someone else.
Right.
And then I do think that those who are leading those trips have the responsibility of also pointing out, we came here to work with a church, which means that some point in history, somebody came here to plant this church.
Yeah. That didn't exist before.
That didn't exist before.
Yeah.
There are places today where we didn't go to, X to plant, to partner with a church because there's no church to partner with.
Yeah.
I have a young lady that that Amy and I have known for a number of years, and she's served as a missionary, still serves as a missionary in Iraq. Mm. And interestingly, she's an American. Yeah. She's from Hispanic origins, so she grew up in America, but both of her parents were Mexican American. They immigrated to America. Her parents got divorced at an early age. She lived with her mother and 3 brothers. At one point, her mother was actually homeless, and she went to high school with her and her 3 brothers living in their car.
Wow.
Her mother wouldn't go to a homeless shelter because they would always split up the kids, and she wouldn't be separated from her children.
Oh,
so,
my goodness.
Yeah, it was just an amazing story of an amazing mother, who did this. But the girl goes to college. First person in her family to go to college, goes to college. While she's in college, she actually feels called to be a missionary. She's listening to stories about, like in the previous weeks, we've talked about unreached peoples, places where the gospel isn't.
Yeah.
She's a Latina. She speaks Spanish. She goes on a short-term missions trip with people from her school to Guadalajara, Mexico. You know, she speaks Spanish. This is her. She's very comfortable culturally and linguistically there. She walks in. She's in the church. They're just doing the normal, like children's cruise. You know, they got puppets and they're doing the stuff that you would normally do on a short-term missions trip. Yeah. And they've got some service stuff they're doing in the community, all that. One night, she's sitting in the church service, and while she's there, she's a young lady. At this point, she's a college student. She feels like, she says, when she told me the story, she goes, Mark, I thought I was having a heart attack. She goes, I was literally like, this makes no sense, but I feel like I was in so much pain. She goes, my heart was hurting that bad. I got up out of the service, walked outside and sat down like on the stoop of the church. And I was just crying out to God, please, I feel like I'm dying. I'm hurting so bad. And she said, in that moment in Guadalajara, Mexico, not unreached peoples, not unreached places, all of that, high gospel presence, she felt like God spoke to her heart and said, you have been praying that you would feel my heart for the unreached. I let you feel it for just a second.
Oh, ouch. That's incredible.
Sitting on the front step of a church in Guadalajara, Mexico, where there's high gospel presence, God called her to Iraq.
Wow. She knew there.
She knew there that God was calling her to the Muslim world. Okay, and then later it became clearer to go to Iraq. And interestingly, I can go, as you know, I've been to Iraq many times, but I go to Iraq, every person who sees me goes, foreigner. Right. I don't look the slightest bit Iraqi, you know. She's a Latina.
So it's a little more.
Darker skin, dark hair. Yeah. She looks, every time she's there, nobody even gives her a second look. Wow. They just assume she's Iraqi. Yeah. And so it was interesting how God would use even her ethnic background to allow her to be effective. Also, her cultural background, Latino culture, very family-centered, very similar to Iraqi culture. God puts these little, I like to refer to them as breadcrumbs. Remember the old fable? Was it Hans Christian Andersen fables about, was it Hansel and Gretel? Yeah, they were getting the breadcrumbs. Yeah,
that's how they got found.
Yeah, and so the idea being is there are things in our lives that may not be, in and of themselves, they're not a call to missions, but they might be breadcrumbs that lead us to the understanding that we're called. So, I know this may sound very humanistic. I never separate the God component from this. But, as we were talking earlier, I spend a lot of time with university students. Yeah. And I ask them, because they'll ask, how do I know if I'm called? And I'll say, just really simple questions. Obviously there's the spiritual side. What do you think God's saying to you? But on the human side, do you like foreign food? I'm like, well, yeah. I'm like, do you think Taco Bell is foreign food? If so, then you're not called to be a missionary. Do you like to travel? Do you like to have conversations with people who are unlike you? Start going through these things. Or do you like to watch documentaries about different places and different cultures? None of those in themselves are an indicator of a call, but they might be breadcrumbs that lead to an understanding that maybe God has actually been at work in my life before I was thinking about this to prepare my heart for what God had for me.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. If I could just make a wild guess in my history with ministering to people that are looking for the call of God on their life, there's some very natural, evangelists tend to be more extroverts.
Yep.
So there's that thing. I talked about Nicky Cruz, I think last week, and he's a natural leader. So God showed, and he's been used in leadership for impacting the world, but he was a leader when he was a gang member. And so that those natural things play into. I think there's an occasion and exception. So I love to, as you go, share Jesus with people, airplanes, hotels, neighbors, but that was from a supernatural empowerment that the Lord said to me, almost like, I'm going to show my glory through you because you're the least likely, because you're an introvert. You don't really like people very much. I mean, I'd rather spend a day alone than with a group of people. You don't like to travel, but I have you going around the world. So I think there's that rare exception that God just uses to say, it doesn't have to be the natural.
Sure.
But I think you're so true that, I think 90 to 95% or more of people that are engaged in their calling has something to do with the temperament that God put within them, and the exception would be the unusual call.
And in both cases, there is one commonality, and that's lordship of Christ.
Yeah.
So you quoted the more like the old King James. Go ye therefore.
Okay, right.
The modern translations say, therefore, go and make. Well, do you know what the verse before it says? I mean, you're a student. I'm putting you on the spot here. The verse before it says, all power and authority has been given to me. Therefore, go make disciples of all nations.
Power,
because I am the Lord of all eternity and all geography.
That's right.
Every person who's ever been born and every person who will ever be born, I am the Lord of all of that.
Yeah.
Therefore, based on that authority, go and make disciples.
That's good.
So it's not I could tell my kids, go do such and such, and maybe at a particular stage in their life, they might have done it out of fear. I mean, I don't think I was an overbearing father, but in a certain stage of their life, probably they might have done it out of, well, I love Dad, so I want to do this, But having lived in a monarchy, for a number of years, Amy and I lived in a country that had a monarchy. Right. You understand that the only response to an edict of the king is yes. Yeah. The only proper response. And so the difference is we have a benevolent dictator. Yeah. We have a benevolent Lord. So he not only wants his good, he wants our good, and he wants the good of the world. But we have to get past this understanding that our good equates to comfort and ease.
Right.
So we have interest. We grow in our interest by reading, by engaging with other people, by we grow in knowledge. Then we get involved by what can I do? How can I serve? Yeah. So we talked about maybe going on a missions trip, joining the missions committee at your church. How can I serve locally? Finding out people in my neighborhood who are different than me, how I can engage with them, all of that. And then there's the investment piece. Yeah.
Before we get there, I just want a few little comments still about the involvement. Sure. When you talk about the benevolent
dictator,
or the monarchy of the kingdom of God, his command, the Great Commission is a command, right? Yeah. And so therefore, or I'm using the King James, go into all to all nations.
Right.
We really haven't talked about that, and maybe we need to do that another because we're running short on time. But the command, so I think in our comfort culture, making disciples is. I meet with a couple college students each week, and that is making disciples, but it's not fulfilling the Great Commission because you're not going to all nations, and so there are ways to kind of overcome that a little bit now, just in helping. Where you even go on a short-term mission, maybe you have a lot of media experience. And you go join our friend who's working in Japan and help them do a media project. Yep. So there's a lot of creative ways to get that involvement thing. But I think I want to just encourage people to say to fulfill that disciple-making commission, it's not just I'm going to disciple a few people in my church. It's intentionally thinking, how do I help make disciples in Yemen, even though I can't go there? Maybe is there a way to connect with somebody who's connected with somebody who's, and that could be the next thing we're talking about is investing, but you're going to comment on that?
No, that's okay. Where I was headed 100%. And because, I think the whole point is, it drives me crazy. You've probably heard this before. Somebody will say, you can pray or you can give.
Right.
Since when did those two become inseparable options?
Right.
I think if you are a Christian, you are going to care for the things that God cares about.
Yeah.
Certainly, God cares about the lost. He cares about the poor. Mm-hmm. We've talked about that. We're heavily engaged with the poor here at World Challenge. And we're engaged with the poor, especially in places that don't have social safety nets.
Right.
Where our investment and our engagement is the separation, not between a good life and a bad life, but between survival sometimes and lack of survival, death. And so the poorest of the poor. So I should be praying for not everybody is an intercessor,
right?
But I think all of us can be intentional about praying, about apps on my phone. I have a book I use called Operation World. Just starts with A, and it goes through every country of the world. Yeah. And it's done on a calendar. And it even gives me pray this. Yeah. It gives me 3 prayer requests to pray.
And from knowledgeable sources of what the great needs are in that country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you know this, but my one of my phone, I can even show you. My phone is set up with reminders.
Yeah.
So I have my phone is set up to go off at certain times of the day.
I know you pray for your family.
So one of them is related to my phone. The other one is 10:02. 10:02 every day, my phone goes off. And it's based on Luke 10:2. The harvest is plentiful, the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send forth laborers into his harvest field. So at 10:02 every day, my phone goes off to remind me just to pause. I don't take 40 minutes.
Right.
It's usually 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But I'm giving something of my time to say, Lord, send laborers into the harvest field. There's 7,300 people groups out there.
Yeah.
That remain without an adequate gospel witness. In some cases, no gospel witness at all. Send laborers.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question there? Sorry to interrupt. But
no, not at all.
Finish. I don't know if you finished your thought about what's on your apps, phones. Do you recommend, with your experience in helping people pray for unreached people groups, do you recommend the adoption of one? Like I'm going to pray for the Guarani people, or I'm going to pray for the how do you say it?
Uyghurs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I have a couple that I've started to pray for more regularly, or just get an app and I'm going to pray for this one day and that for one day. Do you have a preference in that?
I don't. If they'll pray for the lost, I don't care what they do.
That's a great answer.
I think as long as just do something.
Yeah.
Doing something is better than doing nothing.
So that's almost the answer to, we started the podcast. What I'm just one person. What can I do? Something.
Something.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's probably the perfect answer.
Yeah.
Do something.
Don't drown in the fact that you feel incapacitated because you can't solve the problem.
Right.
And we talked earlier about need, and need is a factor. We both acknowledge that. But I want to just kind of go back to the fact that the whole missions enterprise is not God. It's not man-centered. It's God-centered.
Yeah.
It's his idea. He's the empowerer. He's the sender. And he's the one who brings the fruit.
Yeah, that's so good.
So that he might receive the glory.
Yeah.
That's
good. That I think one other way of involvement, and it could filter into investing as well, is collaboration. I was listening to Michael O from Lausanne, and he interesting because he's kind of a brainiac, but he told this really interesting story. He said, Spider-Man had kind of his own flow of like followers, and and then Hulk did, and all the superheroes had their own. But the Marvel franchise didn't explode to multi-billion until Nick Fury, the head, brought all these together. And he said that's what the church should be: collaboration. There's a lot of superheroes. There's great pastors in America that probably some of them probably listening to this podcast who are doing their own thing. They're so, and rightfully so invested. I got to reach my neighborhood. I want this church to be blessed. I want the people in my church to grow. But they can get involved in a collaboration in world, reaching out to the world as well by just saying I'm one person, but I can do something. Especially when I team up in collaboration with others, and that's a kingdom principle: unity. Jesus' prayer, make them one, and that the world would know. That to me always threw me off. Is like, if you and I are one, and we go out to eat together, and we go to movies together, and we play golf together, the world's not going to come to Christ because of that. Right. But when we become one in collaboration of kingdom purposes and principles, when we're using our investments and our time and our energy and our money to expand the kingdom, then people go, hey, these people are really after something here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And with that, we bring part 1 of Gary and Mark's insightful discussion on engaging in global missions to a close. We hope you found their conversation thought-provoking and inspiring. As they mentioned, cultivating a heart for God's worldwide purposes involves developing interest and finding practical ways to get involved. If you're feeling stirred to learn more or take action, we encourage you to explore the resources mentioned in this episode and prayerfully consider how God might be leading you. But the discussion doesn't end here. In fact, Gary and Mark have more wisdom to share on this vital topic. Be sure to join us again next week for part 2 of their conversation, where they'll dive into the critical role of being invested in mission work. You won't want to miss this opportunity to hear more from these experienced leaders and discover how you can make a global impact. Thanks for listening to the Gary Wilkerson podcast. If this episode has sparked your interest, please share it with a friend and invite them to tune in next time as well. As always, you can find more information and resources at worldchallenge.org. Until next week, may God bless you as you embrace His heart for the nations.